Hello and welcome to your weekly edition of The Wrap. I'm Travis Fain from WRAL's state government team.
And I am Will Doran, another state government reporter.
We're coming at you a little early this week. We're recording Thursday just about 4 p.m. So, guaranteed that all kinds of news is broken and it's probably happening right now, and we will not be up to date. But you know what? It's a free podcast. Hey.
They call Thursdays the Legislative Friday, so in a way we're still recording on Friday.
So happy Legislative and or regular Friday to you. I think we're going to start talking about voting bills today. There are two of them. One to change the makeup of the State Board of Elections, as Republican lawmakers have tried to do in the past. And then another that I've been kind of referring to, Will, as the omnibus bill. It's got a bunch of stuff in it.
Yes. Democrats have called that a jumbo jet of voter suppression. Republicans have run with that, and they say we prefer actually jumbo jet of voter integrity. So jumbo jets on either side.
Either way, clearly, every 2 years we need a jumbo jet worth of changes in our voting laws, and the fact that we do that so often, I'm sure, has nothing to do with these polls we see where people don't trust the process.
Yeah, well, and I mean, those polls are what Republicans are saying is driving this. They say, look, you look at these polls, and even if you and I think that elections are fair, a lot of voters don't, and we need to do something. That's what we're hearing from Republican leaders. We need to do something to try to make voters trust more in the process. And what we hear from Democrats is that's just all a bunch of baloney, and they're just using that excuse as a smokescreen to pass changes that are going to help them further cement themselves in power. And, this is a lot of the changes are kind of minor, but this is a really close state. I mean, we have elections that get decided by very, very just fractions of a percent of votes. So, every little bit can make a big difference.
And those changes moved through committee today, right? Thursday is this morning?
Yes, and both of these bills are still very much works in progress. The version we saw get introduced is still largely, but not entirely the same. But bill sponsors have suggested that there could be even further changes on the way. For example, one of the really big sticking points, especially in kind of the jumbo jet bill, of what I'll let our listeners decide. But in that one would really take a aim at mail-in voting. It would tighten up the deadlines, make those ballots be in by Election Day, and remove the 3-day grace period we have after elections currently. And it would also institute a rule for signature matching, which other states have used, some with kind of mixed results. You've seen reports in other states that have signature matching that say, their software isn't great, and, people's signatures that are really the same to the naked eye still get flagged as being fraudulent because, someone's hand kind of trembled or something, when they were doing it. And so Democrats have been trying to take that out. They say, look, we already in North Carolina require, if you're voting by mail, that you have witnesses sign it, watch you vote, obviously not who you vote for, but, that you did vote the ballot, you are who you say you are. The witness has to say this is all under the threat of perjury. You can be charged with a felony. And, if this goes through, you would still have to have the witnesses and do the signature matching. They said that's just overkill. And so they're trying to take it out. And actually what we saw on Thursday is that Republicans might be open to that. Senator Mujtaba Muhammad, a Democrat from Charlotte, introduced an amendment that had, 20 different things in it, lots of different technical changes. But one of them was just getting rid of the signature matching rules. And the Republicans didn't just shoot it down out of hand like you might have thought they would. They actually, there was no vote on it at all on Thursday. And they said, we're actually going to take this, look at it over the weekend. And we're going to make sure that something similar comes up as a floor amendment whenever this goes to the floor, which I think probably could be soon, very soon, probably before the end of this month.
Yeah, on absentee ballots, they're making it harder to vote by mail in general with what you've been talking about, but also, already in law, but held up by the Supreme Court until recently, is voter ID.
Right.
I don't know that people realize you're going to have a photocopy of your ID and send that in with an absentee ballot. And I don't know that the Venn diagram of people who tend to vote absentee and people who have photocopiers in their homes, I don't know that there's a lot of overlap there. So, There are going to be quite a few changes, it looks like, to the way we vote by mail. But I mean, that bill, as you said, moving forward, should move through the Senate, I guess, next week.
That seems to be the plan, yeah.
Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, has said that he and the House election chairs support both bills. They may want to add some things to the omnibus. There's always going to be a change here and a change there. But I mean, a lot of the Board of Elections bill, at least, was worked out ahead of time, Moore said, between he and Berger. That's the one where instead of having the governor controlling, the governor's party having a majority on the state board of elections and county board of elections, they would be tied.
Right.
They would be half Republican, half Democrat, right?
Right. And the exact way that this bill is setting it up has never been tried before, but 3 other ways to do basically the same thing, to have a tied board of some type, have been ruled unconstitutional twice and shot down by voters a third time at the ballot box, as recently as 2018. So, it's proven to be both unconstitutional and unpopular. We talk to Republicans about it and they say, well, we think things have changed. And obviously the big change is Republicans now have a majority on the state Supreme Court.
Right.
And so they think that, this time they have maybe, worked with their lawyers enough and, have maybe a friendlier majority on the court that they think that this version they can now get through.
The 4th, 5th, or 6th time is usually the charm. The bill limiting whether or not transgender kids, how they can play sports in schools, has moved forward. House Bill 574 is going to be the vehicle on that. You may remember there was a House version and a Senate version. This will only impact transgender girls, transgender women. The idea is to in the way bill sponsors would describe it, is to keep boys off of girls' teams, not the other way around. At one point, the idea was to kind of do both, but it would just affect transgender girls, women, anybody who their birth certificate basically says they were designated male at birth, and now they are transitioning. This would be middle school through college. And that one is essentially a done deal. It has been moving forward, and I think will move forward as is. And we'll go to the governor. I assume he'll veto it potentially, and then we'll have that overturned. Sports betting signed this week. Will, you tired of talking about sports betting? Let's go spend like 45 minutes on this thing.
Did you see that there were actually betting sites that were offering prop bets on what exact day the governor would sign it?
Of course. I mean, that's the world we're about to live in. The Lottery Commission will have to award 12 licenses. They're 5 years, renewable. They're $1 million. Earliest they could start doing that, actually start gambling in North Carolina, is January 8th. But the commission has a year from this week to go live on that. That's from reporting from our colleague Brian Murphy.
Yeah, so could be up and running in time for March Madness.
Surely there is going to be a fire lit under everyone involved here to go as fast as possible.
Yeah, you have to imagine. And, we'll wait and see how much money the state brings in. There had been some complaints that the tax rates here weren't quite as high as in other states and that North Carolina was maybe leaving some money on the table. But I suppose they could always change that in the future. Yeah,
and the bill did morph, though, close to the end there to give more tax revenue to the state. Still not as much, though, as you note, as some other states. So we'll see there. I'm sure there'll be lots more reporting on that because, boy, it's definitely a can of worms. So the governor's commission on the governance of the university system, it put out a draft report. Basically, they want legislative Democrats to have some say, have some appointments to the university system's board of governors, and they want the individual UNC campus trustee boards to have some appointees from the governor's office, which is something they had up until, I think, 2016 when Pat McCrory was out and Governor Roy Cooper was in. And, boy, all of a sudden we decided the governor didn't need to have so many appointments.
Same thing we're talking about with the elections board.
Yeah. None of it will happen. I mean, it's essentially dead on arrival, but that did kind of start moving this week. By the way, happy birthday to Governor Cooper. Tuesday was his 66th birthday. So. You want to do some quick bills here? We'll just run through them, Will?
Yeah. Tell me about the solar bill that you covered earlier.
Yeah, so you remember the bill on protecting natural gas appliances? It makes it so that cities can't outlaw gas stoves, stuff like that, water heaters.
Which was not happening, I don't believe, in North Carolina.
There had been some chatter about, well, maybe in Asheville, but no, I don't think it was. Put it this way, the League of Municipalities did not fight this bill. I think they had bigger fish to fry. And so that was moving forward, and it got tacked. What got tacked into it, this is House Bill 130, is some new rules on decommissioning solar fields. So however many years down the road, a field full of solar panels is no longer needed. Now companies are going to have to prove, all right, we've got a plan, we've got money, we've set it aside, we're going to take care of this, and there's a new fee, DEQ's going to get involved. That seems to has industry support. So that kind of joint natural gas and solar bill, I believe, has hit final passage, but my notes don't say that, so I'm not sure. But it's going to happen.
Well, and another bill aimed at, tackling some real-world problems that we wrote about was the Civilian Traffic Investigators Bill. And this is because police, across the state and really across the country, agencies just can't hire enough officers to fill the vacancies that they've got. And at the same time, they're just not really solving enough crimes. I mean, clearance rates for murders and other violent crimes are at really low rates. And so there's a bill that just passed the legislature, is on Cooper's desk right now, that would let cities hire civilian investigators to go to fender benders. Basically, any minor traffic accident that doesn't have injuries, they don't think they're going to need to arrest anybody. And what that is, those people don't have to go through the same background checks, the same kind of physical fitness requirements as cops do. So they're much easier to hire. And that will hypothetically free up the police to do more important work than spending all of their time driving out to, minor wrecks on the highway and writing up paperwork and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there was some back and forth as to whether or not to try that in a few areas, to have it kind of be like a pilot project. I think ultimately they did that statewide. I will stand to be corrected.
Correct. Yeah, well, actually, 20 years ago, we started pilot programs in Wilmington and Fayetteville, and those, by all accounts, have been going great. And the idea back in the early 2000s was to, if those did go well, quickly move it to being statewide, but that just never happened until now.
Yeah, 23 years, quickly enough.
Yeah.
The woke investing bill, or the no woke investing bill, that went to the governor this week. Will, tell us about that one. I know you covered it.
Yes, this would ban state government from considering ESG in awarding state contracts, deciding how to invest the state pension plan, things like that. And for people who aren't up to date on the world of finance, ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance Score. It basically is, does your company have a diverse board of governors? Does it have a history of pollution? Does it have a history of human rights abuses? Does it have a history of corruption in foreign countries? And how well or poorly you score on these factors influences your ESG score. And this bill would ban considerations on that. So not only, the pension fund, for example, couldn't refuse to do business with companies that have poor ESG scores, but it also wouldn't be able to invest in a company simply because it has a high ESG score.
Yeah, the way I read the bill is the only thing the treasurer and the board that decides how to invest the state pension plan can look at is, will this make as much money as possible? It has to be a pecuniary interest, in the words of the bill.
Right. It's kind of weird because if you actually look at how ESG stocks have been doing, there's all sorts of, specialty portfolios that, have only ESG stocks. They really actually tend to outperform the market. The reason why, investment firms like BlackRock, which is the biggest firm in the world like them, is because they're kind of seen as more stable and less prone to volatile swings in their prices. And, if you look at year to date or even going back 10 years, ESG stocks outperform the S&P 500 as a whole. So, the argument is, well, we're getting into woke investing and we're going to be losing money, by bowing to wokeness. But actually, if they had been doing this woke investing all along, our pension fund would have a lot more money in it.
And you have to wonder how much of this is coming from a place where companies want to move money. They want, instead of money being invested here, they want it invested over here. And this is a way to, hey, maybe you ought to stop these woke companies. Oh, you should invest in us too, by the way.
Probably also worth noting that some companies with particularly low ESG scores also tend to be major GOP donors.
Totally unrelated, I'm sure, Will.
Yeah.
No. Penalties for attacking substations will go up. So y'all remember the Moore County blackout, something like 45,000 people out of power for several days because some yahoos shot up a couple of substations. Well, the federal punishment for that is severe. I think it's in the neighborhood of 20 years. It depends on how you look at it. But the state penalties, I don't know that they had so much contemplated somebody might do that. And so they said, well, we're going to take a look at these state penalties, and they have passed now a minimum of 58 months if you attack, basically if you attack the power grid. Trespassing in one of these areas would be a minimum of 4 months and significantly more. That's the minimum if you have no record. The bottom line, that is passed. That's on its way to the governor, I believe. And then there was a separate bill from Representative Ben Moss, that would have required security upgrades at these substations in various places. That hasn't gone anywhere. I know Duke Energy has already done some upgrades. I don't know if the lawmakers are just satisfied with that, or if they just looked at the possible bill on that and said, "Nah, we don't want to induce those charges." Or
it would certainly be expensive.
Yep,
more expensive than counties losing power for weeks. I don't know.
Yeah, and as you have pointed out, the legislature doesn't often like to tell Duke Energy what to do. They will from time to time. But Senate Bill 673, this is kind of an interesting one. It's called the Wastewater Regulatory Relief Act. It deals with how much water a toilet uses and how you have to calculate how many homes you can build because of various water uses in the house. And we're changing the calculation to aid growth, because what developers will tell you is, hey, we have more capacity than the calculations allow us to build for. So this is changing that. There's some concern that we're overpopulated in certain areas, but the bill passed the House 97-9, the Senate 49-0. Went to the governor on Thursday. I know it was a significant priority for the home building industry. That's Senate Bill 673. And I'll very quickly mention the regulatory reform bill, House Bill 600. We got to spend some time on this one in the future, Will, because it's 36 pages long. I know the Southern Environmental Law Center is concerned, particularly with a PFAS section. That's the perfluoroalkyl, just pretend I pronounced that right. That's Gen X and the other stuff, the forever chemicals in our water. SELC said earlier this week that the bill is a polluter's wish list and has provisions in violation of the Federal Clean Water Act. They also have concerns over some hog waste provisions there. Our colleague Liz McLaughlin monitored this in Senate Judiciary earlier this week. She said it was one of those bills where there was only 6 minutes left in committee, and they're like, well, guess we got to pass it because we're almost out of time. Someone else needs the room. But I think that one, as we go forward.
That seems to happen a lot with these really complicated and controversial bills. They always just happen to come up at the very last minute when there's no time to really debate it.
Well, it seems like it happens so much that lawmakers would plan for more time in the schedule. Maybe we should suggest that to them. That, hey, these controversial bills that really need a good public hearing, maybe they need a little more time. If only.
You heard it here first, folks.
Brilliant ideas in governance. State budget. I know people want to know about this. So,
speaking of no public debates.
And not a ton of movement. Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, said Wednesday the budget negotiations between the House and Senate are not moving as quickly as he'd like, but that they are really close on salaries and benefits. But there are some big ticket items like long-term revenue projections, reserves, the SCIF, that's the pay-as-you-go building fund, capital fund. Those things aren't going as fast as he would like. Transportation is a big priority for him, he said, given growth. He said he expects the pace and intensity of talks to increase next week. No kidding. Phil Berger.
You'd hope so. I mean, fiscal year ends at the end of this month.
I used to think that was important, but that was the young Travis who had hope. Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger today, Thursday, said, we're a ways apart. Taxes, a pretty good distance apart. Same with reserves and how we use one-time money, including how much to spend on water and sewer projects. We've done a lot of that in the state budget in recent years for localities to help, particularly in rural areas, deal with water and sewer problems. I don't know that that's a transportation versus water and sewer spending issue, but I will note that Berger said water and sewer and the Speaker said transportation. Read into that what you will. Also, some back and forth over how to deal with mental health. Representative Donnie Lambeth, right?
Yeah. Lambeth, who's, should note, a House budget writer, has a $1 billion plan for mental health spending that he rolled out. I think it's pretty notable that it was not included in the actual budget itself. It was a separate bill. The Senate, from what we understand, is not necessarily on board with that plan. But actually, Governor Cooper's administration is. So you kind of have the House and the governor saying, "Hey, we've got this pot of $1 billion that largely could be coming," and some kind of differs where you're going to get the money from. But we have this big signing bonus for expanding Medicaid that we need to spend, and how do you do it? Well, maybe on mental health, maybe on other stuff. That's a huge part, from what I understand, of some of these budget talks.
Yeah, and what Berger told our colleague Laura Leslie and some other reporters today in the kind of after-session gaggle was that there's a big concern about using one-time money for what seems to him more a recurring cost in mental health. But this is the paraphrase quote: "I know that there is a desire in both the House and the Senate to do something on a recurring basis to deal with mental health. So I think you'll see some of those initiatives in the budget." So he's mapping out a kind of halfway potential there.
Yeah.
Where are we on medical marijuana? That's one of the bigger issues still outstanding along with the budget, it seems to me.
Yeah. We are further than North Carolina has ever gotten on this before. It's passed the Senate twice in the last 2 years now. Last time, the first time it passed the Senate, the House never gave it the time of day. This year, the House has given it a committee hearing. It's kind of stalled since then, and what we know is that Republicans in the House are kind of talking behind closed doors on, hey, do we actually want to do this? Do we actually want to support this? If it was just put up for a vote, it would probably pass. You'd have to imagine that every Democrat, or just about every Democrat, would vote in favor of it, and a decent number of Republicans. But there's kind of, this unwritten rule that you don't put bills on the floor that aren't supported by a majority of the majority party. So Republicans have been meeting by themselves to talk about, hey, do we actually want to do medical marijuana here? Polling shows that it's very popular with the public. It gets 75-80% of support, based on what poll you're looking at. But especially in some, especially Christian conservative circles, it has a lot of opposition. And, that's who a lot of politicians depend on to win their elections. So
also a key priority for the Senate Rules Chairman. So, always good to have that in your back pocket if you're the House as a negotiating tactic, as kind of the horse trading of what bills are going to pass goes forward. There's a mandatory House Republican caucus the Speaker announced Tuesday, by the way. I don't know that that's related to this bill. Could be about the budget. Could be just they've had poor attendance lately, so now they're calling it mandatory. But I don't know that I had heard him use that phrasing before in announcing a caucus. Tell us, and quickly, I don't want to, we're getting on time here, but the GOP convention was last week, and you heard former President Trump, Governor DeSantis, and Mike Pence. What did they have to say?
They had quite a lot to say. They all spoke for a long time. Trump spoke for over an hour and a half. DeSantis and Pence both spoke for about an hour. It was interesting. DeSantis and Pence were almost identical in what they talked about, except Pence uses the word political correctness and DeSantis uses the word woke, which I think may just be a generational divide in the GOP. They use them basically interchangeably. It means the same thing. But one big difference, obviously, in what Mike Pence had to say was he talked a lot about January 6th, and it was not necessarily well received. You could have heard a pin drop in that room when he was talking about it. There was a small smattering of applause when he said, President Trump wanted me to, back him instead of the Constitution, but I chose the Constitution, and that's what I'll continue doing when you elect me as president. Got, some kind of courtesy golf claps, but that was not a popular line. Really, the most popular lines from all three of them, and a key topic they all hit on, was transgender stuff. And, whether it's banning public schools from, having books about transgender issues to, banning pro-LGBT things in the military, different ways that they all proposed of kind of hitting on transgender rights. That really got just the biggest applause lines of the night for all of them. And Trump actually explicitly acknowledged it to the crowd at one point. He had gone on, this long talk about how, he's not going to cut Social Security. He says, some of my other opponents want to cut your Social Security. I'm not going to do it. And, he was talking about taxes, and like the room was pretty tepid. People weren't really clapping. And then he launches into something about transgender people, and he gets this huge applause, and he just kind of stops. And, anyone who's seen Trump's speech knows that he can riff, and he just says, 5 years ago, nobody even knew what this stuff was, but now I talk about it, and y'all just eat it up, and nobody really cares about taxes anymore.
Yeah, I had covering state government for however long I have often noted that you give people a good little culture war to fight about, something to be afraid of, something to fight on. You do that in the front door, take whatever you want out of the back door.
Yep. You just don't often hear politicians acknowledge that quite so explicitly.
They also censured Senator Tom Tillis, one of the most successful Republican politicians in the state, one of the men most responsible for the 2010 takeover of state government, but he's too woke, I guess, with immigration,
yes,
gay marriage.
Mostly gay marriage. That was kind of the tipping point, from what I understand, for a lot of these conservative activists. People remember after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, there was concern that they may next target gay marriage, and so Senator Tillis and some other Republicans worked with Democrats in Congress to pass a law codifying same-sex marriage. And that was just a step too far for a lot of GOP activists. They said that goes against the GOP party platform, which opposes gay marriage.
Yeah, I believe that they're not wrong about that. Yeah.
Of course, I believe Trump has also been in favor of gay marriage, and they did not censor President Trump.
Well, maybe they just felt like he was lying about that. I mean, I know that'd be out of character, but meanwhile, polling memo circulating this week from Paul Shoemaker, the kind of establishment Republican, one of the biggest consultants in the state, really targeting Mark Robinson and his electability in the governor's race next year. He writes that both the Democratic and Republican parties have become so polarized that crossover voting between the two parties occurs only when one candidate is badly flawed. Spoiler alert, he's talking about Mark Robinson. It goes on to say that polling the gubernatorial election without adding information to tell people who these candidates are is irrelevant at this point because voters don't know much about Mark Robinson. So anyone saying that the GOP race, this is a quote, anyone saying the GOP race is a lock is just promoting their favorite candidate. On the issue of eliminating science and history classes in grades 1 to 5. So what they did was they polled various things that Mark Robinson has said, and they watched how it shifted. One of the things he has said, although I think he's backed off of it, is that he wants to eliminate science and history classes in elementary school, just be reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yeah, he put that in his book, but then I think later said that no, never mind.
Wrote it in a book, which I've never written a book, but I think you're pretty careful about what you put in there. And then he was like, oh, I didn't mean that. But anyway, when people heard that, as they certainly will in a commercial at some point, 72% said they were less likely to support Mark Robinson for governor on his failure to pay property taxes, which is something that I believe Brian Anderson, my former colleague here at WRAL, broke, that the Robinsons had some tax issues. 65% said they were less likely. This is all obviously, Will, a preview of the attacks that Robinson will face. Shoemaker said in his memo that the statewide ballot, when voters learned of various Robinson issues, moved to 51% for Josh Stein, the Democratic presumably nominee, and 31% for Robinson. Here's the kicker. Republicans have time to fix this. The question remains whether or not they will find the will to do so. So Mr. Shoemaker, obviously, he's coming for Mark Robinson.
I mean, he's been a Republican consultant in the state for a very long time. He's obviously, concerned about how effective these Democratic ads are going to be, especially since, unlike the Republicans, the Democrats do not have a contested primary. At least it appears right now. It looks like the race is Josh Stein's for the taking. Meanwhile, Mark Robinson's got two legitimate opponents in State Treasurer Dale Folwell, former U.S. Rep. Mark Walker. So, he's going to have to spend a little bit of money if he wants to win that race.
Yeah, and, in the world that I live, I think I'm guilty of this because Mark Robinson seems wildly popular to me. But I am moving and speaking to a subset of people that deal in politics all the time. And while the Republican primary voter, that's a good proportion of it, it's not the majority proportion of it probably. So there is a lot left to learn for people to learn about Robinson and every other candidate we've got in 2024.
Yeah, the average person probably doesn't know who many or any of these people are.
Send this podcast to the average person and tell them it's 30 minutes on state politics.
They'll love it. It'll be great.
Oh, yeah. By the way, we're closing up here. Mandy Cohen, the former head of DHHS here in North Carolina, President Joe Biden planning to name her head of the CDC. Good bit of pushback, though, over
Yeah.
her pandemic handling from some North Carolina Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, she was really the face of the COVID lockdowns here in North Carolina for businesses, for schools. You know, she was on TV just about every day, you know, explaining, okay, you know, here are new numbers or here are the new rules we're rolling out. I mean, you know, she was just as front and center on this as Governor Cooper was. And, you know, that obviously has earned a lot of ire for her on the right.
Yeah, school closing, masking, various requirements, business closures, rightfully pinned on her. I mean, people can have different opinions about what a good idea or a bad idea was, although it's a lot easier to talk about it in 2023 than it is to be the person deciding whether or not to pull the trigger on those things in 2020. I've seen Mark Walker, Dale Folwell, Ted Budd, and Dan Bishop all basically say she should not be head of the CDC.
Notably, though, the majority of our Republican congressional delegation not on that list that you just mentioned. So
that is notable. Session timing, it's looking more and more likely, we're still at this in July. Probably doesn't surprise people too much. Berger on Thursday, Senator Berger saying they would probably be, I think this was actually Tuesday he told me this, that they would probably be here in July for veto overrides and not much more. Speaker of the House Tim Moore on Wednesday. Sounded a little more if we go into July, it's not that big of a deal. It was essentially what he said. So
we'll see if they can get the budget done in a couple weeks.
They're still trying to get that budget done in the last week of June, and I would still argue that we're in that space where nothing's been done. Everything's done. A lot of times you see a breakthrough on a couple of things, and things move very quickly, and everybody breaks for the door because July 4th is a bit of a marker in this game. So
yeah,
that's all we've got for you. Really appreciate you listening to the wrap, and hope you have just a wonderful day.